Peoples of the universe, please attend carefully. The message that follows is vital to the future of you all. I am the master, and you will obey me. Yes, I have taken over the role as the curator of this show for a month dedicated especially for me, the master. We're no longer talking about the doctor, we're talking about the master all through this month. And here with me to start this glorious journey of 4 weeks of dedicated to nothing but me is a brand new guest to this show. Does the curator ever get these quality guests? I think not. Say hello to Joe. How are
How
you
we
doing?
doing? Doing well, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about the true hero of Doctor Who, the Dark Lord himself, if you will.
Yes, of course. I know the curator wanted to work with you for a very long time, but he was too lazy to actually book you, or too lame, or whatever. But not this guy, not the master. The master brings in the quality. The master does not disappoint. And speaking of not disappointing, we are going to talk about, as the curator usually does it, with the birthday section of the month. Obviously, we are still kind of talking about the month of February, only the 28th of February to be specific. The rest of the days are all for March. From the 28th of February all the way up to the 6th of March, we start off with, on the 28th, Mr. Marvin Pinfield. He was, of course, an executive producer of many the episodes in the William Hartnell slash Patrick Troughton era. He also directed the Sensorites, Planet of Giants, and the Space Museum. Actually, I think he was only just involved with the William Hartnell series. But yeah, he was an executive producer of many of the early season 1 slash season 2 seasons of the show. His name appears in the credits. You probably noticed him. Now, also on the 28th, a man whose name appears in way more credits, the living legend himself, the one, the only Mr. Murray Gold, the John Williams of Doctor Who, the composer extraordinaire. He composed the music for every single episode for the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Doctors, as well as being the composer for Torchwood and the Sarah Jane Adventures, and he's now coming back for the 60th anniversary special.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
what? Go ahead.
I didn't know that he was coming back for the special. That's good
Oh
news.
yeah, he's coming back with the specials. I don't think he's staying around after the
That's
special,
sad.
but at least we're getting him for that. Now, on the 1st of March, and I swear, Snark, if you're watching this, I promise I am not doing this on purpose. It just keeps happening. I have no control over it. March 1st, the man himself, the living legend, Roger Delgado, the first master, the reason we are all sitting here today. He originated the role, and in my opinion, he's still the best. Like, he cannot be beat. He will never be topped, in my opinion.
Now, I am curious. When we first met the Master, he was supposedly on his last reincarnation, right?
Yes.
Do you think at any point we'll see older versions of the Master in current Who? And do you think Sasha Darwin is perhaps one of the older versions of the Master?
It's an idea that has been proposed. Obviously, it's no small secret that the Doctor and the Master meet each other at the wrong order. They never meet at the same number.
Just like River Song.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's always possible. I mean, we do know that there was a Master that predated the Roger Delgado Master on Big Finish, and he does appear regularly, played by James Dreyfus. We're not here to talk about him today. But on the television side, who knows? I mean, we still need an explanation as to what happened to the other 10, 11 incarnations besides the Roger Delgado and James Dreyfus version. But also on the 1st of March, Mr. John Napier, he was a designer for the stage play production of Doctor Who and the Daleks in the Seven Keys to Doomsday. It was a very famous stage play production from the 70s or 80s, I can't remember, which featured Trevor Martin as the Doctor. I think we talked about him a couple of weeks ago on his birthday. Now, on the second, let me just make sure I get the name right, Mr. Stephen Thorne. Take a guess. Who did he play? And keep in mind, he was either in makeup or prosthetics the entire time.
I'm gonna go with one of the Martian ice soldiers.
Okay, that's a good
Ice
theory.
warriors. No,
Yeah, that's a good theory.
Who was it?
Okay, so are you sitting down for this?
I am.
He was Azal in the Demons, the Demons. He was Omega in
Oh,
the
wow.
Three Doctors and Intervention Earth, the Big Finish episode, and he was also Eldred. Eldred must live. That's him.
Oh, wow. He was a lot of things.
Yeah, he continued to play all these roles on Big Finish, as well as a lot of other roles. So, really, the man did his work on Doctor Who. Also on the 7th, we have Miss Jocelyn Lee Eisen. She played the character of Carla Langer in the Sarah Jane Adventures, the mother of Clyde Langer, the sidekick character on that show. Also on the 2nd, again, this is weird how these things keep happening. On the 2nd, Mr. Michael Troughton, the son of the 2nd Doctor, Patrick Troughton. He played several different characters all over Big Finish. He was Professor Albert in Last Christmas, the Capaldi Christmas special. He did several other characters on Big Finish, but mostly, I mean, he plays the role famous by his father. He plays the 2nd Doctor on Big Finish right now, currently in the newer range of the new 2nd Doctor adventures. We're still sticking with the 2nd because we have Mr. Alexander Armstrong. First of all, visually, he played the character of Reg Arwell in The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe, but he's mostly remembered as being the voice of Mr. Smith, the supercomputer from the Sarah Jane Adventures. Still sticking with the Sarah Jane Adventures series. On March 5th, I have a feeling this is going to make a lot of people happy. Mr. Matt Lucas. Nardo from the Holy Season. He also played it. One of my absolute favorite one-off characters on Big Finish, the Jelloid from The One Doctor. If you haven't listened to that episode, it's a must. It is hilarious, and he really sells that whole entire sequence that he's in. Now, finally, wrapping up our list on March 6th. This might actually make Frenchie a little bit upset, but I don't care. After what he said about this guy last week, Mr. Rufus Hound, the meddling monk on Big Finish. One of my absolute favorite characters, and he sells you on this character tremendously. He also played the character Sam Swift in The Woman Who Lived, the 2nd Maisie Williams episode. But I mean, to me, he's the monk. And I wish we get to see his interpretation of the monk on the television series because he's great. And the series he did with Missy is absolutely outstanding.
So what I've learned today is that I need to listen to the Big Finish episodes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Trust me, it's a rabbit hole, but it's the one you're going to enjoy. It's definitely a very enjoyable rabbit hole. So the wonderful list of people we had today. Thank you all. We quite literally could not do this without you, especially this guy, especially this man right here.
I'm also very happy about the way that you started with the last day of February and wrapped around, because nothing is more master than just altering time to fit your perception of it. You know?
Yeah, so all the people who were born in leap years in like the 29th, 30th, and 31st of February, they don't count. They don't matter if they even exist. So
they're literal children. I mean,
yes. They only have a birthday once every 4 years. So
what do they know?
So shall we get started with the main topic of today, the 4 classic masters?
Oh, yes.
Before we start, what was your first introduction of the master, classic or modern?
So mine, I started watching with the Ninth Doctor. Went through. So my first incarnation was the first incarnation in New Who. It was putting it in order. Probably Derek Jacobi. That brief introduction of him. Um, and then it was the legendary John Sim. Uh, I mean, who still to this day I think is the perfect encapsulation of the madness of what the Doctor has become, but also just the brilliant psychopath that Roger Delgado started it as. He brought it all perfectly together, in my opinion. But he was the one that had most of those Delgado traits to me in the New Who Masters. But yeah, I mean, one of the greatest characters in sci-fi, and one of the greatest relationships. The Doctor
Hmm.
and the Master, the cat and the mouse, the bat and the Joker. You know, it's that the two sides to the same coin kind of thing.
Yeah, the whole reason they introduced the Master into the show in the first place was because they felt they needed a Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock Holmes, which was the Master, the exact polar opposite in many ways. Now, for me personally, I started with David Tennant as my first Doctor. So, again, just like you, my first exposure to the Master was the Derek Jacobi version, which then obviously followed into the John Sim Master. And then obviously I went back in time, as any Time Lord should, and got caught up on all the other Masters. And my first, well, my personal favorite, I would say, is, in my opinion, the best Master, and really the first Master we're going to talk about, the Roger Delgado incarnation, first introduced in Terror of the Autons and lasted all the way up to Frontier in Space. So let's just start off the conversation. What do you feel like is the best thing that the Roger Delgado brought to the role, keeping in mind that he's really the first?
I think the best, the thing that he did better than all the rest, in my opinion, was using disguises, subterfuge, and he was more brilliant. Like he felt like he was mentally on par with the Doctor,
Mm-hmm.
whereas some of the later ones, it almost seemed like they were a step behind at times. Delgado, like Sim, usually felt a step ahead.
Yeah, it was. He was in many ways, and the comparisons between the two never really stop. He was basically like a James Bond villain to the Third Doctor, who was kind of a James Bond type character, right? Like I heard a comparison recently that really perfectly encapsulates the whole John Pertwee era in and of itself. Is like the the John Pertwee Third Doctor is the British version of 1960s Batman in a way.
Yeah, I could see it.
And what good is a Batman without his Joker
Yeah,
slash Riddler slash Penguin slash all these different roles really molded into the same character with the Roger Delgado Master. So I mean, he doesn't really disappoint when first introduced. You don't even know the character's name. Just a random TARDIS appears in a carnival or a circus. I can't remember.
I think it's a circus.
Yeah, I think it might be a circus. You don't know who the character is. The character, he introduces himself as, he's usually referred to as the Master, universally. And the first thing he does is he grabs the guy who's about to hit him, and just, you can see he's controlling him through his eyes. And he just snaps, and the guy just follows him like a puppet. So he establishes his dominance. And remember, in that episode, Terror of the Autons, that's the opening scene, I think. So he establishes himself as a major threat before you're even being reintroduced into the Doctor in that episode. Before the Doctor and Unit make their appearance in the season, and you continue. And one of the things that I think the producers and showrunners at the time said they regret greatly is that they felt like they overexposed the Master in his debut season. I disagree. I felt like that is what made that character what it is. Like, he was in every single serial of his debut season, and then later seasons he was only episode here, episode there. So I think that first season of that was the season of the Master. In any way you can tell about it. The Master was just as much a central figure of that whole season, just as much as the Doctor or Joe or the Brigadier or any of the other main characters. So I think that's what really put the Master, elevated him up to the status that he is today. Unlike certain other characters, like the monk, who only appeared in a couple of episodes here and there, and have gone on to becoming bigger characters in some expanded Doctor Who media. The reason the Master is an S tier level villain, the reason he is held in such high regard, in my opinion, was the fact that he kept coming back. Even though every time they thought that they got him, that he's in prison, they killed him, he ran away, he keeps coming back. So
Now, I do kind of understand where they're coming from, just because had you made the second season he was in the season of the Master, and in the first season just had him as like a background character with more of like an ominous buildup, and then use that second season as the real concerto of the masterpiece, I think that would have also had a nice impact. Just a little more building up to the Master before they unleash him in his full masterness.
glory.
Yeah.
I think I see your side of it. I see your side of it, and again, I do agree with what they were. I do see what you were saying when they said that they felt like they overexposed the Master. I just happen to disagree. I think the
Yeah.
overexposure really helped.
I don't think
But
it was overexposure. I just think that having a little more buildup could have aided it. That's all.
to bring an example, River Song, right? She was she was in one episode with Tennant. She was in a couple of episodes with Matt Smith's first season, and then in season two, you really start to they really built up her character, and that's why she's received the iconic legendary status that she has today. With the Master, they sort of did it the opposite way. And you know what? It's almost like what you're suggesting is kind of like a Thanos
Yes,
type villain.
exactly.
Introduced in the last movie of Phase 1, regularly appears all throughout Phase 2, and then Phase 3, bam! That's where you do the sucker punch, the 1-2 punch of Infinity War and Endgame.
And especially with a character like the Master who has the ability to hypnotize people, mind control, you don't actually have to physically have put him as a pawn on the piece on the board. You could have let him be the one playing the game of chess, you know?
Yeah, and one of the many things that the Master is known for is that when he goes up against the Doctor, he very rarely uh, goes one on one with the Doctor. He always finds underlings to do it for him. He's always in cahoots with other alien beings to fight the Doctor for him, like in his debut episode, the Autons, like the Sea Devils, the Axons,
The cheetah
and
people.
yeah, well, yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But yeah, and the reason I'm saying this is because this is really the core element that Roger Delgado brought into the role of always operating through puppets. Even the Sasha Dewan Master. We've seen it with the Kasavin in Spyfall, the Cybermen in the season 2 finale, and more recently with Power of the Doctor, the Daleks, and the Cybermen together. So yeah, every time I think the Master is at its best when he's not one of the pieces on the board, when he's the hand that controls all the pieces.
Yeah, that's where his power comes from. His power comes from planning. His power comes from getting others to do his bidding. His power, unlike the Doctor, where the Doctor's power comes from making friends and people wanting to do things for him. The Master is kind of the opposite, where he uses leverage and trickery to convince people to do things for him.
And he's manipulative. And another thing we do get to see from the Master is that even when pushed to the corner, he's no slouch. He's got the tissue compression eliminator. He can kill people in a horrific way by shrinking them down a size in the process. Like he's still really good in a fight. He's still just as clever as the Doctor. He can build himself a way out of situations. He uses trickery and underhandedness. In one episode, he even changes his voice to sound exactly like the Brigadier to trick Sergeant Benton at one point. And he's a master of disguises as well. And I think that's really where his downfall falls a lot of the time is when he assumes another persona, another alias. It's always some variation of the word master, right?
Yeah.
Like even in that first season, he's like Mr. Masters or Mr. Magister
Like
or
Colonel Masters at one point
yeah,
too.
Colonel. Yeah, he always uses the word master, and then that's usually what gives him away.
It's his
And
hubris.
yeah,
His
and
hubris is his
there's
downfall.
one episode where the Doctor hears one of I think it might have been the demons or the demons, where he goes by Reverend Magister or something like that. And the Doctor hears and is like, the hubris of this man knows no bound, or something like that. I can't remember what he exactly says. The vanity or of this man, whatever. So yeah, I think we spent long enough talking about the first master. Now, obviously, for those of you who don't know, his last appearance was on Frontier in Space, which was season 9? No, season 10 of Doctor Who, the 10th anniversary season, where he's seen alongside the Ogrons, manipulating two sides of the same political spectrum: the Human Empire versus the Draconian Empire, to fight against one another, and sort of tries to destabilize the region. And by the end of the serial, it's then revealed that this whole time he's been working he's been working in collaboration with another species, the Daleks, who he then calls upon to track down the Doctor. And that serial kind of ends with the Doctor making one of his with the Master making one of his last minute escapes, and the Doctor tries to follow the Daleks using the TARDIS telepathic circuits for the first time, I believe, on the show, landing on the planet Spyridon, and that's which leads us to the next serial, the Planet of the Daleks. But the Master is nowhere to be found in that one, which unfortunately that was his final appearance, because shortly after that, the actor Roger Delgado unfortunately passed away. He was filming another film in Turkey, I believe, and he was during the filming, he was in a car that sort of was filming a car chase scene, and unfortunately, during the filming of that scene, the car sort of flew off a cliff, and him and everybody else in the car perished in the crash, which was 1973, I believe. Yep, June 18th, 1973. So obviously that whole tragedy really hit the cast of the Doctor Who really, really hard, especially John Pertwee, who was close friends with Roger Delgado at the time. And some say that's one of the reasons that persuaded him that it was time for him to leave the show. That he wanted to leave the show after that season, which of course led to his final season with Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane. Now, they had started production at the time on another episode that would have been Roger Delgado's final appearance as the Master, an episode that would have thrown the hint that the Doctor and the Master may be brothers of some kind. Before we move on to the next Master, what do you have to say about that idea being thrown out there?
Well, I never heard that before. I don't. I like it. I think it's a good idea, although it would have very much so changed everything that we've gotten in New Who. A lot of New Who is based on their friendship, on them growing up alongside each other. I guess they could have still done that if they were brothers, but I feel, knowing the Doctor as we do, and as how reluctant he is to give up on the Master as is, if it was his brother, it would even be more so. But I also feel like he probably would have gotten through to the Master earlier if the Master was his brother.
I don't. Based on what you said, I don't think it would have changed our understanding of the Master as much as you propose. Like again, with the John Sim Master in The End of Time, he mentions running around the fields of Gallifrey together. In going back to the Big Finish realm, there is a very famous story in Big Finish that talks about the Doctor and the Master as children in the academy, and there was this one bully who kept bullying them while they were still children. I think he grabbed, I think it was the master's head and shoved it into a river, forcing him to drown, which caused the doctor to throw a stone at him and kill him. Story for another time, possibly, but that's all that storyline with the other masters in the classic series, in the modern series on Big Finish, and comics and novels. All that storyline could still be intact if they were brothers. It would have just changed up the dynamic a little bit. But yeah, and I don't know. I don't think that if they were brothers, the Doctor would have been able to get through to the Master a lot quicker. I don't think that that really influences, because we know how far the Master has fallen in all the time that the Doctor knew him. So I don't know if that would have helped. Maybe the redemption arc that we see Missy gonna go a little bit sooner, but who knows? Who knows?
I just feel like John Sims' master, he all he wanted was family and acceptance. So had they been family, I feel like he would have been the turning point as opposed to it being Missy. But that might just be my observation on the character traits, because we see when he brings all the Time Lords in, John Sims, not to go too much into New Who, but he's doing it because he wants his people back. Like he wants to be accepted. That's what he's craved all along, was for people to, worship, but worship under the guise of love and acceptance, kind of.
I always appreciate different perspectives on Doctor Who. That's why I always try to have as many diverse guests on the show as possible. I think I took it as he brought back the Time Lords in that two-parter because he wanted to do the same thing that he did to all the humans on Earth to the Time Lords of Gallifrey. But I don't know. That's just the way I took it. That's really the best thing about the Master, is that you can't read him or her. Like, you never fully know. Even the Doctor never fully knows and understands what the Master's true motives are, and that's what makes him such a fascinating character.
Yeah, I do like the fact that, like the Doctor, each incarnation of the Master seems to have slightly different motivations and slightly different driving forces.
Yeah, and speaking of different incarnations of the Master, following Roger Delgado's tragic death, the Master was a no-show for the next couple of seasons, right up until The Deadly Assassin, where we got Peter Pratt as the Master, who looked like this.
Yeah, it was a scary.
Yeah, and obviously because of the storyline itself, because of how that version of the Master was written, all Peter Pratt could do was just to play him as a horrifically disfigured monster, the Monster Master, if you will. And obviously, I think a lot of this Master's potential really shines in Peter Pratt's performance. I think, in my opinion, he's probably the most underrated Master of all time, simply because he was like a one-off, and he's not really remembered as much as some of the other Masters. But what he did in that one episode, again, we only have one episode with him, so there's really not much to judge, but he did great. Like, he was scary, intimidating, and without sacrificing any of the Roger Delgado brilliance, in a way. Obviously, he lost a lot of the charm and the suaveness, the Bond villain aesthetic that the Roger Delgado brought to the role, but he more than made up for it with the scary and horror elements that he brought, like playing dead to get the one-up on the one guard that tried to kill him. And obviously, he had he really was kind of unstoppable at some point, killing people with the tissue compression eliminator left and right. He stabbed someone in the back. He threw the Chancellor Goth under the bus as soon as it was convenient to him. Obviously, that's one of the most craziest schemes that the Master's ever pulled off, assassinating a president before he can announce his successor. So this Master, I think, accomplished a lot in a relatively short amount of time, going so far as to steal the Sash of Rassilon and the Rod of Rassilon and open up the Eye of Harmony and almost destroying Gallifrey. And again, this Master was a one-off, and look what he managed to accomplish in that one episode he was in.
Yeah, he was a creepy and very successful. He was the most maybe cerebral of all the masters as far as his scope and grandeur of his plan. Um, he also, the more we talk about these classic masters, the more Sasha Dewan, master, is really the uh, the perfect represent. Like, he does such a good job of bringing back all the traits of all the classic masters, including the writing, the compression gun, the tissue compress. Like, they brought it all full circle, and it's amazing. You really see the madness in this doctor. You see the desperateness. All he wants is to regain his life. He just doesn't want to be forgotten and fade away. He's trying to cling no matter what it takes at all costs just to get back himself.
Yeah, and again, this is another trait that was became a staple of the master that Roger Delgado did not bring to the role is the unwillingness to die, the eagerness to stay alive, the stubbornness to stay alive, if you will. We've seen it happen in the End of Time. We've seen it happen all throughout Missy's season, and even the Doctor himself says it in Last of the Time Lords. Is he if he kills himself, that's the one thing he can never do, and this master really shows it full force. Like he reached the end of his regeneration cycle. Like he's supposed to be dead, and he's still clinging on to life, no matter what this did to him. Look, I mean, just look at this image right here. Look at the toll that it has on his body, on his mental state, everything. And obviously, in expanded media stuff, we get to learn more about how this skeletal and decaying state affected him. But sadly, Peter Pratt also passed away before he can get into some of the big Finish era. But thankfully, we have more more classic era Masters story being told through the vocal talents of Geofry Beevers, the other decayed master, the only one of the classic masters still alive today, and he's still playing the master to this day. And he brought back this character in The Keeper of Kraken. Sadly, he didn't have a lot in the way of screen time in that one episode, but I think the fact that he's still playing the master to this day and adding more substance to the role is really telling a lot. And he really, unlike his predecessor Peter Pratt, who just leaned into the more Frankenstein horror madness part of the role, the Geofry Beevers' interpretation actually plays the master more of a Phantom of the Opera type character, a tragically disfigured character trying desperately to maintain his humanity, his reality, and trying desperately to get a new body, in this case being the Doctor's body, so he can continue to live on as a proper being of the universe. So let's talk a little bit about the Geofry Beevers interpretation.
I I thought it was a really good interpretation. I thought his planning got a little worse, maybe, from the previous incarnation, just not as in depth. I don't think he thought as many variables and circumstances. Um, I do think that this specific undying master that we've seen in the last two was a big spark for David Tennant and Matt Smith's not wanting to die kind of turn as the Doctor, where they started to feel the same kind of way where they wanted to hold on to themselves. Although, unlike the Master, they still had more lives left. They just didn't want to give up their current lives.
Yeah, and to think that by the time a Time Lord reaches his 10th, 11th, or 12th incarnation, not only are you starting to see the end, like you're starting to realize that, hey, I'm running out of lives here. I'm not going to be around for very much longer. But also by that point, by when you reach that age in Time Lord lifespans, it starts to become. You really start to feel the idea that regeneration is not an excuse to stay alive. It literally feels like dying, and that's what the David Tennant version says in The End of Time. Like everything he is dies and some new person comes along. So I think people really underestimate how much this experience affects Time Lords. Like we look at it as like, oh, so they're immortal. They die and they come back. But to them as people, it really does feel like giving up a part of themselves, actually properly dying and then coming back as someone else, someone almost unrecognizable. And this sort of thing could be said about the difference between the Peter Pratt version and the Geofry Beevers version. Obviously, the real reason they switched the actors is because one actor was more available at the time than the other. But obviously, people like to add lore to these things, so some people have suggested that the reason, and obviously they decided to just do a facial makeup on Geofry Beevers as opposed to stick with the old mask worn by the Peter Pratt version, because that mask terrified children for years. So they decided to,
Terrifies me.
yeah, it terrified Soda when I sent him a picture of the master once. So like that mask is still scary to this day. And first of all, great prosthetic work, great work on the mask, but I feel like the showrunners at the time felt like that was going a step too far. We want to scare children, we don't want to traumatize them. By the way, this brings me to another story of the Planet of the Spiders. Not really a master story, but Planet of the Spiders. You know how, by today's standards, how cheap the spider props look today?
Yeah.
According to Unset Stories, they had more realistic and more scary looking spider props when they were making that episode. And then the producer slash showrunner at the time, Barry Letts, came in and saw that, and he's like, "Nope, nope, that's too scary. Get that out of the way. Get remake those props as less scary, more fake plasticky looking spiders." So, and that's the spiders that they used in that episode, and it still terrified and traumatized arachnophobes at the time who were watching it. So, like, again, like I said, they're trying to scare the children. They don't want to give them nightmares that will continue to their adulthood. So, on that note, I think the choice to go with makeup and prosthetics as opposed to the mask helped Geofry Beevers bring out the performance.
Yeah, it allows you to show a lot more emotion.
Yeah, he's much more expressive, especially in this picture right here. And when he talks to the doctor, when the doctor is trying to touch the button and he's frozen, and the master is just circling around him, you really do see the madness that is the master in Geofry Beevers' eyes. And of course, I mentioned this earlier, but there's really no way of getting around it. The fact that Geofry Beevers is still around and still continues to play the master to this day helps to elevate this version of the master tremendously. Obviously, if you get to back finish, you get to learn much more about what this process is doing to a person. Like, he mentions repeatedly that every second of his existence is unwavering agony and pain. Every breath he takes, every thing he touches, he can't walk, he can't blink, he can't eat without it hurting like a hell this whole time, which really is it shows you why the master is so mad and crazy. Is because look at what he had to endure just to stay alive, and look at what how desperate he is to hold on to life, right?
Yeah. It's almost like one of those you so in the newer episodes they kind of retconned what made the master go mad. In the new Who, even though people like to say that they never do that. That's all, but
Sure, right.
yeah. Doctor Who has always been rewriting lore as it went. It's just the way the show has gone.
Course. Yeah, the first Doctor has one heartbeat.
And then it from there you see. So back then the master wasn't mad to start with. He just went mad as time went on. He wasn't. It wasn't when he was a kid that the Time Lords, made him mad, as we learn in New Who. It was just that time makes you mad after a while, almost. The longer you are victim to eternity, the more chances you have to break. Which I think you see that a lot with the Doctor, even in his later seasons where he starts to not necessarily crack up or go evil, but he starts to like starts to doubt existence and has a lot of esoteric moments where he's second guessing the meaning of things and his place in the world. I
Yeah,
think that that's a lot of the same driving factors that the Master has in these classic seasons.
yeah. Now, obviously, whenever you introduce these concepts of retcon and rewriting stuff, there's always something that still remains, and that's headcanon, in my opinion. And do you want to know what my headcanon of the whole the four drum beat in his head is?
Hmm.
It's always been there since he was a kid. Obviously, that's stated pretty obviously in the John Sim Masters portrayal, but it was always this thing in the background that he barely paid any attention to, and it really only came to the forefront when he reached his Derek Jacobi incarnation because he lived through the Time War, and it really came into focus when he would change himself back into a human because the human version of Professor Yana, that human persona, just he didn't know why he had the four drums. He didn't know he was a Time Lord, so that's what drove him uh, to the edge to open the watch. And when he finally opened the watch, became the master again. He finally accepted who he was because of the four drums and the John Sim version. That's really where it shot up into high gear. That's why the John Sim Master, in my opinion, has the biggest victories over the Doctor in many different ways.
Oh, by far. But also the four drums, is that supposed to be that's representative of the heartbeat of a Time Lord, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, I
Instead
thought so.
of boom 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 boom, you've got boom 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 boom. So, and again, that was installed by Rassilon during the last days of the final day of the Time War. But it's always been around through the James Dreyfus version, through the Roger Delgado version, even in the Peter Pratt and Geofry Beevers incarnation. It just really came to the forefront in the Derek Jacobi, John Sim versions. Now, obviously, we can sit here talk all day about the madness that was the Geoffrey Beevers interpretation in many different Big Finish episodes, but obviously by the end of that serial, the Keeper of Traken, that version of the Master got himself a new body at last.
And the one that favors Roger Delgado the most. Uh,
Yep.
he's the closest looking to the original, even though
Yeah.
he's supposed to be a different body altogether.
Yeah. Different species altogether.
Yeah.
But as Snark puts it pretty, and by the way, I played that clip just for Snark because Snark loves it. But as he puts it pretty clearly, is how else would you know that he's the villain? He's got to have a villainous goatee, which is what brings us to the Anthony Ainley version of the Master. Obviously, the version that has been the longest on television, still to this day. It was the main adversary for no less than four doctors, that being Tom Baker, Peter Davison, uh, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy. And yeah, he's been the Master for 9 years. Not 9 seasons, obviously, but just he's been the Master on and off repeatedly, and just I think he had the most diversity of stories with all the other than the other masters. What do you think? First of all, what do you think about the Anthony Ainley version of the Master?
I love it. This is where I feel like the Master Delgado was the bar, if you will. But I think that Ainley is the Master that most people remember. Uh, Not just because he was there for so long, but also a lot of the decisions made during his tenure as the Master would go on to set the future of the character pretty well. Also, he faced off in some of the like his, as I was saying earlier, one of my favorite Master stories is his last. Um
Survival?
the cheetah people. Yeah, it's you know, it's all about his willingness to sacrifice others to save himself, which has been the Master's number one driving force since the end of the Delgado uh, run.
Yeah, and I think he said it best. He's the most like the Delgado, especially out of the classic series, but I think that's more to his detriment rather than to his benefit. I think the reason he's not particularly high on my personal favorite list of masters is the fact that he tries too much to be like the Roger Delgado version without being his own interpretation. There are certain elements I would say that really define his version of the master differently than Delgado, but to me he is just the master. You know, he's very generic one note most of the time. He did introduce the concept of my dear doctor, you have been naive, but that's really all it. Like everything that he does, the Roger Delgado version could have done and probably would have done it better.
Well,
But I think
I agree, but I don't think so. If it wasn't for the fact that Delgado died, I think that we would have still seen Delgado. This is still supposed to be the same master mentally. It's not like he regenerated into a different, uh, personality. So that makes sense to me in my head canon, that he's like Delgado, which is where to me that works. Which I can understand why for you or somebody else it might not. Um, but the way that I draw it up in my head is that this has all been one character. Unlike where the Doctor, when he regenerates, he becomes somebody else, a new version of himself. This master has been the Roger Delgado master the whole time.
and you know what? I'll even one up you on that. Again, bringing Big Finish into the mix, they stated because again, unfortunately, Anthony Ainley passed away in 2004, I believe. Which Big Finish was still doing back Doctor Who stories back then, but they introduced the idea that after this body failed him, the Master pretty much reverted back into this persona and continued to be the that version of the Master, having been through everything that the Anthony Ainley version did, just with this body for the other doctors at the time.
Hmm.
So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's still technically the Roger Delgado version, going through the Peter Pratt, Geofry Beevers, Anthony Ainley, and then back to Geofry Beevers interpretations. And some could even argue that there are even more masters before we get to the Derek Jacobi master and even uh, the Eric Roberts master, because technically speaking, he still didn't regenerate when he became the Eric Roberts incarnation. Just, but I think even the Eric Roberts interpretation in the movie brought something different to the role than the Anthony Ainley version did. And one thing I will say in Anthony Ainley's favor, the longevity really does help. Like like you said, he did basically all the things that the Roger Delgado did, except he did more of it because he got to appear in more episodes and he got to work with a lot of different doctors, and that's really a plus. In this master's favor is, I sometimes like the idea that certain doctors have their signature master, like John Pertwee with Roger Delgado, and like David Tennant with John Sim, even though John Sim later did a couple episodes with Capaldi. I like the Sasha Dewan, Jodie Whittaker dynamic. I love Missy, Michelle Gomez with Peter Capaldi. I love some of the Big Finish dynamics with the doctors, but I think the Anthony Ainley, his strength comes in the fact that he can work with multiple different doctors, and the story doesn't really matter. It's the chemistry between him and the actors. I think he works great with both Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy, and even Michael Jaston, who played the Valiard, who is still technically another doctor. So, yeah, Anthony Ainley really does bring the doctor master dynamic to the forefront, I think.
Yeah, and
And
I also think that he is subtle enough in his portrayal of the master that it allows the Doctor to shine. Whereas with Delgado, at times, he's such a commanding presence that he almost became the focal point of a lot of those episodes. Where I feel like the Ainsley Master allows the Doctor to shine more.
Yeah, I see that, and I think to go back to a point that I said earlier, part of the Anthony Ainley elements that he brings to the role of the Master was, unlike the Roger Delgado version, which really had underlings to do the heavy lifting for him. Anthony Ainley, a lot of the times, was a secondary villain in some of the stories, particularly in the Mark of the Rani, where the main villainess was the Rani. The Master just happened to be there, but he still caused a lot of problems to the Doctor and Perry. But the main villain was the Rani, and in obviously the Trial of a Time Lord series, the Master really only shows up to reveal the secret that the Valeyard was the Doctor all along. The Valeyard is the true villain of the piece, all things considered. So, like you said, he didn't overshadow the plot or the Doctor in a lot of different ways, but he still was a threat. He still was a villain. Just the fact that it's the Master of all things. I think, in my opinion, again, this is just a personal taste. I think if the Master is in a story, he/she, they need to be the commanding presence. Maybe not overshadow the Doctor or the companions, but they need to be the presence. Like with the John Sim Master, that whole trilogy, and I do consider it a trilogy of Utopia, Son of Drums, and Last of the Time Lords, that whole trilogy works because the Master is such a commanding presence. And every time you see Missy on screen, she's electric. She demands your full attention, right? Same thing with Sasha Dewan. And I would argue still the same thing for Eric Roberts. So I think the fact that this Master doesn't stand out as much, while it does maybe help to bring out better stories, it doesn't really help the Master himself a lot.
Well, I also think the more muted moments that Ainsley had and that some of the other ones have, I think those muted moments help those signature moments stand out more. I think that when you're going 100% all the time, it starts to lose steam. That's why, like with New Who, after a while, the writers they started to regret the exposure level of the Master, just because when you're constantly running at 100%, then if you go to 90%, it looks like you're falling backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're running at 60%, then those 100% moments they just hit harder.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up examples of when the Master really outshines this Master outshines everything. Like, I think one of his standout episodes was Castrovalva. Technically speaking, it's Peter Davison's debut episode, honestly. And the Master really does shine in Castrovalva and Logopolis. And then other episodes like Mark of the Rani, and I think even the King's Demons, not so much. But then every once in a while you get episodes like Time Flight, where he really shines. And like you said earlier, Survival. That's another good episode where he stands out. Just there's a certain balance, I think, that really helps when you're dealing with a character like the Master. Speaking of Time Flight, by the way, do you want to hear an interesting story about that episode?
Absolutely.
Okay, so obviously in that episode, Anthony Ainley was the Master, and spoilers for a 40-year-old episode if you haven't watched it. Turns out that the incredibly horribly racist character Colleen was actually the Master in disguise the whole time. Another thing that the Master is known for. But if you've seen the episode, you probably know, Joe, that character was bald, right? Clearly. Now, according to some stories told by Tom Baker, Anthony Ainley is as bald as a kneecap. That's Tom Baker speaking, not me.
That could make sense because that hair,
yeah,
it's giving wig.
First of all, the fact that he had the exact same hairdo throughout his entire existence as the Master, that should have been your first clue.
I mean, he
But
wasn't a young man.
clearly,
I
but
mean, I'm on my way there, so you know.
but Anthony Ainley was very, very, very sensitive about his baldness situation. So that's why he had all of his episodes as the Master wearing a wig, which I will say it really does help the character a lot. Like, there, obviously on Big Finish, if you get there, there is a bald Master, like full on Lex Luthor bald, which is great. It works for that interpretation of the character, but the wig mixed in with the goatee and those scary eyebrows, I think this really completes the look of the Master in a way.
It
But
also works very well because of the longevity that he had, with him not changing appearance as much. So it gives the illusion that he's not aging, as Time Lords are not supposed to age at a regular rate. It
yeah,
allowed him to stay looking a similar age for a longer period of time.
yeah, I think the only time where the Max actually does show his age was in Survival, which was the final episode of the show. It really, in a way, it was kind of like the opposite of Patrick Stewart, where in that case, him losing his hair at an early age allowed him to take more older roles like Picard and like other different roles that he took on at the time. The Anthony Ainley, it was the opposite. Like his wig allowed him to maintain younger-ish roles for a long period of time. But going back to the Time Flight story, so obviously he was bald, he was wearing a wig, and the character that the Master was impersonating as was also bald. And so the producers suggested the idea that for when he was playing that character, he take off the wig and just have the makeup and prosthetics on his naturally bald head. And as I've mentioned, Anthony Ainley, very, very sensitive about his hair, outright refused to do that. So during all the scenes of where Kali actually appears, he's wearing a bald cap
Yeah, you
on
could
top
see
of the wig,
it.
on top of the wig that he's wearing. So
Sometimes, man.
yeah, so he wouldn't even take it off for a role that was supposed to be bald. So you know, the things some people do to maintain the illusion of having hair. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't understand it. My hair is going. I'll be fine once it's gone.
I mean, hey, you're a better person than me. I actually had to go abroad to do surgery to get my hair back, but that is a story for another time. So I think we've done a fine enough job filling out an hour talking about these four people. Obviously, we've got plenty more masters to talk about, but that will be a topic for next week where we talk about all the modern series masters with another guest. So, Mr. Joe, first of all, thank you for finally finding the time to do the show with me.
Oh,
I'm
thank
so
you for
happy
having
that
me.
I'm so happy that I got you on the show, and really looking forward to doing more shows with you as the next few months roll around. Where can the good people of the interwebs find you when you're not on here?
Well, you can find me on the Multiverse of Geekdom channel on Sundays, a couple other days. We're gonna start doing more short form videos, a lot more reactions, things like that. You can find us over there. You can also find me on Twitter at Joseph M. Boros. That's where I am usually most of the time.
Okay, and I usually save this for Fun with Flags, but you're really keeping the legacy of this wonderful man alive.
We're
So
trying.
yeah, we all here at the Northern Entertainment Group YouTube channel and the entire Benverse at large, thank you greatly for that. Now, as for me, you can find me every Monday on this show, The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, every Thursday on Fun with Flags, with a show that I do with Soda, where we talk about our individual countries. You can also find me on my personal YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek, where I do weekly reviews of every single Doctor Who episode from 1963 all the way to 2022, and other random reactions and other videos whenever I have the time to do those. Speaking of Soda, he can also be found on the Blokes of Wrestling, which I believe I got to ask him again. I think they decided to change to take that whole show, the Blokes of Wrestling, from the Let's Get Ready Network and transitioned it into his own show or another channel. Again, it's better to ask him about it, but also on this channel, the Northern Entertainment Group YouTube channel, we have you seen this with Daniel, Snark, and Dave? They talk about what I call lesser television because it's not Doctor Who every week on Tuesday, if I remember correctly. And also, you should check out our good friend Taco over on his YouTube channel. Let's something to talk about. He does all kinds of fun Star Warsy stuff and other things. I will be on his next Star Wars Alien or Not, Star Wars or Not game, which I believe by the time this comes out, I already would have done it. So yeah, go ahead and check me out on that one. And I think that is about all the plugs for all the people that I know. So yeah, unless you have something else to add about the Master. First, before we wrap this up, what do you think? Who is your favorite Master? The modern series.
It's hard not to choose John Sim, based on the longevity and just the story arcs that he was part of. But I will say Sacha Dhawan is on his way to getting there if he sticks around for a while. I just love the complete insanity that he brings to the character. It just feels like anything could happen, and he's also seems to be one of the best plotters of the group, which it pairs well together.
Yeah. Yeah. But as I mentioned, we will be talking about those modern masters next week. So thank you all for watching if you have, and be sure to let us know what your favorite masters are. And until the next time, everybody, I am the master, and you will obey me.